The group chat had 11 members. I wasn't one of them. I found out by accident. My aunt's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while she was in the bathroom. One message. One thread title. Christmas at Daniel's, don't tell him yet. I stood there reading it for maybe 4 seconds before she came back in. She didn't notice I'd seen anything. She poured herself more coffee and started talking about the weather. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name is Daniel. I own a house. That's the most important thing you need to know right now, not my job, not my history, not anything else. Just that I own a house, and apparently, that made me useful. Let me back up a little. I'm 34. I bought my house 3 years ago, a 4-bedroom place about 40 minutes outside the city. It took me 8 years of saving, 2 side jobs, and a lot of very quiet weekends to afford it. It's not a mansion. But it has a big kitchen, a dining room that seats 12, and a yard that's good for exactly one thing: family gatherings that I had never once been invited to host. My family is large, loud, and complicated in the way that large, loud families usually are, which is to say that the complications are never talked about. They are just arranged around, quietly, for years, until someone finally stops pretending. My mother and I have what most people would generously call a distant relationship. What I would call it is harder to put into words without sounding like I'm performing grief. So I'll just give you the facts. She remarried when I was 9. My stepfather has 3 kids of his own. From that point forward, holidays looked like this. His kids were there, I was not. Sometimes I'd get a call on Christmas morning. Sometimes I wouldn't. There was always a reason. I was old enough to stay home. It was a small gathering. She thought I had other plans. She forgot to check. I stopped expecting invitations in my early 20s. I built a life around that absence, friends, routines, my own version of December. It didn't feel like damage anymore. It just felt like fact. Then I bought the house. And something shifted. Suddenly my mother was calling more. Stopping by. Commenting on the dining room, on the yard, on how much space there was. Asking, with a kind of studied casualness, whether I'd ever thought about hosting the family. My aunt started texting, which she hadn't done in 2 years. My stepfather's youngest, who had never once reached out to me directly, sent me a friend request. I noticed all of this. I filed it away. But I told myself I was being uncharitable. That maybe this was just what happened when families got older. People matured. Priorities shifted. Maybe they genuinely wanted to be closer. I wanted to believe that. Then one afternoon in early November, I drove over to my aunt's place to drop off some paperwork. She's an accountant, helps me with my taxes. I was waiting in her kitchen for maybe 3 minutes while she printed something. Her phone was on the counter. A message came in. The screen lit up. Christmas at Daniel's, don't tell him yet. I read it. I stepped back. She came out of the hallway. She didn't look at the phone. She handed me the papers. She asked about my car. I answered. I left. I sat in the driveway for a moment. Then I drove home. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text anyone. I didn't bring it up at all. Because here's the thing about realizing you're being used by the people who are supposed to love you, the first feeling isn't anger. It's a strange, flat calm. Like something you already knew, finally stepping into the light. I thought about what I'd seen. I thought about the calls, the visits, the sudden warmth. I thought about 11 people in a group chat I wasn't in, making plans for a Christmas in my house that I hadn't been asked about. And I thought about every Christmas I'd spent alone while they were somewhere else, not thinking about me at all. I could have called my mother. I could have confronted my aunt. I could have sent a message to that group chat. I had enough information to find it, and blown the whole thing open right there. But that's not what I did. Because I had a feeling this was bigger than one group chat. And I wanted to know exactly how big. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. I gave it 2 weeks. 2 weeks of normal behavior. Returning calls. Agreeing to coffee with my aunt. Letting my mother talk about the holidays without asking any direct questions. I listened more than I spoke. I let people fill silence with things they might not have said if I'd been paying less attention. It's remarkable what people will tell you when they think you're not really listening. The first concrete thing I found was small. My mother mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd already started coordinating for December. I asked what she meant. She said she was just making sure everyone had a place to be. I asked if she'd booked anything. She said she was still figuring out the details. She looked slightly uncomfortable when she said it. Not guilty, uncomfortable. The way someone looks when they've rehearsed a version of the truth. I let it go. And I kept watching. The second thing came from an unexpected direction. My neighbor, a woman in her 60s who has lived next door since before I moved in, knocked on my door one Saturday morning. She asked if I was planning a party in December. She said she'd noticed a car parked outside my house twice that week, a car she didn't recognize, and that she'd seen someone walking around to the backyard. I asked her to describe the car. It was my stepfather's. I thanked her. I told her I'd look into it. I didn't show any reaction. But that night, I checked something I hadn't thought to check before, my property's smart doorbell. I'd installed it when I moved in and mostly forgotten about it. It logs every motion event with a timestamp. I went back 3 weeks. There were 11 entries of someone approaching or circling the house on days I hadn't been home. 6 of those entries were clear enough to make out a face. My stepfather, twice. My mother, once. My aunt's husband, a man I'd spoken to maybe 4 times in my life, on 2 separate occasions. And once, clearly, all 3 of them together. They were measuring the space. I watched the footage twice. The second time, I kept my expression very still. They were planning a Christmas gathering at my house. A gathering I wasn't meant to know about until they were ready to ask, which meant they were going to ask me in a way that made it hard to say no. Probably close enough to the date that cancelling would feel cruel. Probably framed as a family reunion, a chance to reconnect, something I'd feel guilty refusing. They'd done the reconnaissance. They were waiting for the right moment. I sat with that for a while. Then I started thinking about money. Because here's the thing about a large family gathering, they're expensive. Catering, or groceries for 12. Drinks. Decorations. Heating a big house through December. Parking logistics. Someone pays for all of that. And I had a strong, specific feeling that the person expected to pay for it was me. I looked back at my mother's recent calls. Every conversation in the past 6 weeks had included some mention of my finances, usually framed as interest. How's work? You must be doing well. That house must have been a good investment. Small questions. Probing ones. Then I found the third thing. I have a close friend, I'll call him Marcus, who knows my family history better than almost anyone. He called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday. He said he'd run into someone at the gym who turned out to be married to one of my stepfather's cousins. And that this person, making conversation, had mentioned that the family was getting together at the big house in December. That it was going to be a whole thing. That someone named Daniel was footing the bill. He said it casually, not realizing at first what he was telling me. I asked him to repeat the last part. Footing the bill. I hadn't agreed to host anything. I hadn't been asked. I hadn't offered money to anyone. But somewhere in that group chat I wasn't part of, in conversations I hadn't been included in, it had apparently already been decided that I would pay for all of it. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I opened them and started writing things down. Dates. Names. The footage. The neighbor's account. Marcus's conversation. Every call with my mother, which I now went back and listened to again. I record my calls, have for years, it's a habit I formed after a bad business dispute and never dropped. I listened to 6 weeks of carefully casual conversation with completely different ears. And I heard, woven through all of it, the architecture of something deliberate. This wasn't a family that had grown fonder of me. This was a family that had found a use for me. The warmth was a tool. The visits were assessments. The invitations to coffee were information-gathering exercises. They weren't reconnecting with me. They were preparing to take from me. I organized everything into a folder. I made copies. I sent a backup to a secure email account. And I made a decision. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The first person I called was a lawyer. Not a family attorney. A property rights attorney. I found her through a referral from Marcus, who'd used her for a landlord dispute 2 years prior. Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that within 48 hours of our first call, I had a very clear understanding of exactly where I stood. The house was mine. Fully titled in my name. No shared ownership, no inherited debt, no legal obligations to family members of any kind. Whatever plans had been made in that group chat, they had zero legal standing. No one could compel me to host anything, fund anything, or open my door to anyone I chose not to. She also confirmed something I'd suspected but hadn't been certain about. If I had documentation that people had accessed my property without permission, even just walking around the outside, without entering, I had grounds to send a formal notice. Not a lawsuit. Just a letter. The kind that makes people understand, very clearly, that they have been seen, and that there are consequences for continuing. I told her to draft it. Then I made a second call. To my property insurance provider. I updated my policy to include event liability coverage, specifically, the kind that activates when a third party suffers injury or loss on your premises during an unauthorized gathering. The agent didn't ask many questions. I didn't offer many answers. I was protecting myself. That's all this ever was. The next 2 weeks were quiet on my end. I kept up appearances. I returned calls. I had coffee with my aunt again. I let my mother tell me about how much everyone was looking forward to the holidays. I listened, I smiled where appropriate, and I gave nothing away. During that same period, I documented everything new that came in. My mother called 3 times with what I can only describe as warming calls, longer than usual, more personal, ending each time with some version of it would be so nice to all be together. My aunt texted twice to ask, with very deliberate casualness, whether I had any plans for December 23rd through 26th. My stepfather, who had not spoken to me directly in over a year, sent me a text that read, "Hey. Hope you're well. Big year for the family. Talk soon." I saved all of it. Then, in the 3rd week of November, the ask came. My mother called on a Sunday afternoon. She was warm. She was gentle. She told me she'd been thinking about how disconnected the family had felt in recent years, and how she felt partly responsible for that, and how she wanted to do something to change it. She said she thought it would mean so much, to her, to everyone, if we could all be together this Christmas. Really together. Like a real family. She said she'd been thinking about my house. She said she knew it was a big ask. She said she'd understand if I said no. Then she paused. I let the pause sit there for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then I said, "Let me think about it. I'll get back to you this week." She sounded surprised. I think she'd expected either an immediate yes, guilt-pressured, obligation-driven, or an argument she could work around. The calm, neutral non-answer wasn't part of the script she'd prepared. I hung up and made a note of the time and date. Then I called Marcus. He was the only person inside my life I trusted completely. I told him everything, the full picture, from the group chat message to the lawyer to the footage to the phone calls. I didn't perform any of it. I just told him the facts in order. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he asked, "What do you need from me?" I told him I needed a witness. Someone who could be present, not hidden, not dramatic, just present, when I made my next move. Someone whose account of events couldn't be disputed later. He said yes without hesitating. We agreed on a date. December 2nd. I would call my mother back, tell her I'd made a decision about Christmas, and ask her to come over to discuss it in person. She would expect a yes. She would probably bring my aunt. She might bring my stepfather. They would arrive thinking it was one kind of conversation. It would be another kind entirely. In the days leading up to December 2nd, I prepared the house the way you'd prepare for something important, not for them, but for me. I organized the documentation. I printed key items. I set up the small recording device I use for important meetings, the same one I'd used in the business dispute years ago. I ate a good dinner the night before. I slept well. I had nothing to fear. I had done nothing wrong. I had only watched, and listened, and documented, and prepared. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. My mother, my aunt, and her husband. My stepfather wasn't with them. I think she'd decided this was a conversation that needed her particular kind of warmth, not his presence. She was smiling when she came through the door, looking around the house the way she'd probably been looking at it in her head for weeks. My aunt had brought a small tin of cookies, which I found almost thoughtful in its audacity. Marcus was already there. He was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee, introduced as a friend who happened to be visiting. My family greeted him politely and seemed only mildly curious about his presence. We sat down. My mother started with the warm version. She talked about family. She talked about distance. She talked about how houses like this one were meant to be filled with people. She was measured and practiced and almost convincing. When she finished, I let there be a moment of quiet. Then I said, I know about the group chat. She blinked. I said, I know it's 11 people. I know it's been running since October. I know the phrase don't tell him yet. I know that 2 of the people in this room and 2 who aren't here were on my property without my permission on at least 6 occasions. I have footage. My aunt's face changed first. Her husband looked at the floor. My mother said, Daniel, that's not. I said, I'm not finished. I placed the folder on the coffee table. I didn't open it dramatically. I just put it there. I told her what was inside. The doorbell footage. The call recordings. The formal notice my lawyer had drafted, not yet sent, citing unauthorized access to private property. The documentation of conversations in which my financial contribution to the gathering had been assumed and discussed without my knowledge or consent. I told her I had copies of everything stored in 3 separate locations. My mother's expression moved through several things in quick succession. Surprise, then something close to calculation, then something I recognized from childhood but hadn't seen in a long time. A kind of unguarded fear. Not of me. Of being known. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I sat with my hands in my lap and I spoke in the same tone I'd used to explain a bill. I told her that I would not be hosting Christmas. That the gathering, as planned, would not take place at my house. That if anyone entered my property without my explicit written invitation after this conversation, the formal notice would be filed and the relevant authorities would be notified. Then I said one more thing. I said, you've called me more in the past 6 weeks than in the past 3 years. I noticed. I want you to know that I noticed. That was all. My aunt started to say something. Her husband put his hand on her arm. My mother looked at me for a long moment. She didn't apologize. I didn't need her to. An apology, at this point, would have just been another performance, and we'd had enough of those. She picked up her coat. She said she needed some time to think. I said that was fine. They left. Marcus and I sat there for a moment in the quiet after the door closed. He asked how I was feeling. I thought about it honestly. I said, okay, actually. Not triumphant. Not relieved in any dramatic way. Just, okay. The way you feel when something that needed to be done has been done correctly. In the weeks that followed, a few things happened. My mother did not contact me for 16 days. Then she sent a short text. It said she was sorry things had gotten complicated, and that she hoped I was well. I replied that I was, and that I hoped she was too. That was the extent of it. My aunt's husband, the one who'd been on my property twice without permission, received a formal legal notice anyway. My lawyer recommended it as a precautionary measure, and she was right. He called once, briefly, to say there had been a misunderstanding. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't call back. The Christmas gathering happened at a hotel function room, I was later told. The family split the cost. 11 people, I imagined, dividing a bill that they'd planned to hand to one. I spent December 25th at home. I made a good meal. I called a few people I actually wanted to talk to. I sat in the living room in the evening and looked at the house that I had saved for 8 years to own, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, that it belonged entirely to me. Not because no one else was in it. Because no one was there who hadn't chosen to be. That's a different kind of quiet. That night, everything was quiet.